Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, when the FDA's David Graham told Congress last year that the popular arthritis drug Vioxx killed more Americans than the Vietnam War, Wall Street got the message, but did FDA? Organized labor failed to oust George Bush last November, but, says the AFL-CIO's David Boundy, labor nonetheless achieved unprecedented. Also, Johanna Seltzer joins Liz Lerman to chat about Dance Metro DC, a service organization which aims to support the local dance community. Plus, the folk rock sounds of Billy Coulter. Hear why his band picked up 5 Whammy nominations in 2005. And we've got poetry by Reuben Jackson, Melanie Rivera, Miriam Morsel Nathan, and Grace Cavalieri.
The silent child says, "The teacher's nice to everyone but me. That's how I know I'm special."
Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. Nearly 1 out of 2 Americans takes a prescription drug every day, which helps to explain why the pharmaceutical industry is the nation's most profitable industry. But are these drugs safe and effective? We know we can't trust the drug makers to tell the whole truth. They've got a huge stake in selling us more drugs. That's where the government, the Food and Drug Administration, comes in. An FDA stamp of approval tells us that scientists who have no stake in the sale of the drug certify it's safe and effective. Well, what if a leader of FDA's own Office of Drug Safety says the FDA is virtually incapable of protecting the public from unsafe drugs? And what if he told you FDA views its principal mission as shepherding new drugs to the market, not ensuring their safety? Well, you'd probably have some second thoughts about all those drugs in your medicine chest. Well, meet Dr. David Graham, a Johns Hopkins and Yale-trained epidemiologist, a 20-year veteran of FDA's Office of Drug Safety, where he serves as the Associate Director. Welcome, Dave, to the Coffee House.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I should start out by saying that you are represented legally by the Government Accountability Project, and I serve as a consulting lawyer there, just by way of disclosure before we get started.
And I should disclose that I'm speaking for myself and not the FDA.
We got that out of the way. Let's start with Vioxx. What led you to conclude that it was unsafe?
Well, there were 2 things. One was a study that Merck had performed that was published in November of 2000 called the Vigor Study. And this study showed that Vioxx increased the risk of heart attack by 5-fold, 500%. And this, to me, was a startling finding. The company's interpretation of the data were, however, that Vioxx didn't increase the risks, but that naproxen, another drug used to treat arthritis, decreased the risk. Now, I knew that that wasn't the case, and so I set out to do another study to try to address this situation. We did a second study in Kaiser Permanente in California, and we found results very similar to what the Vigor study found. We found a 3-fold increased risk of heart attack for the high dose and a 1.5-fold increased risk of heart attack for the lower doses of Vioxx. And based on that, concluded that the high doses should be banned and that the low doses of Vioxx weren't as safe as low doses of Celebrex, and so that people should use Celebrex instead of Vioxx. Well, those conclusions were met with a lot of rancor, anger, and I think persecution by FDA management. When I told my supervisors about this, they reacted fairly negatively.
And so what did you do when they reacted negatively?
Well, a couple of things. One, I wrote a report so that it would be documented what we found. And we wrote a manuscript, a scientific article, to put in the medical literature so that the scientific community could read our data and see if our conclusions made sense. In that manuscript, in that paper, we had our estimation of how many people had experienced heart attacks because of Vioxx, a number that ranged from 88,000 to 140,000, and perhaps as many as 60,000 dying because of Vioxx. And these were numbers that I think FDA wanted to keep from the American people because it's an indictment of how poorly served the American people were by FDA. FDA was busy serving industry rather than protecting the public from a drug that should have been removed from the market in 2000.
Why would that be? FDA was chartered in order to protect the public in regards to drugs.
You know, over the years, I think FDA has lost sight of its mission. And this has become increasingly evident post-1992. In 1992, Congress passed a law called PDUFA, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, in which drug companies would pay money to FDA for FDA to review its applications and approve its drugs. Well, as that happened, Congress also cut the budget of FDA. FDA now became dependent on drug company money in order to meet its payroll. And so, you know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Well, industry's paying the piper. And what happened between 1992 and today is there was a transformation within the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research in which the focus became a single focus: approve drugs, approve them as fast as you can, and industry is our client.
But wasn't there a clamor from the public for that? A decade ago, or in the 90s at least, there was a lot of concern that drugs weren't being approved fast enough,
right,
and that medications that might help people weren't getting to the marketplace.
Right, there's that concern. It was initiated, I think, with the community of patients infected with HIV or with AIDS who were facing, you know, a fatal disease and with very limited therapeutic options. And they argued that we're willing to take risks because our back is against the wall. What's happened in the HIV community is that they saw with the pendulum swinging how dangerous that can be for their health and well-being, and now want to have, I think as a group, as a constituency, drugs that are well studied. Now, maybe that change in attitude is also because there are now a number of highly effective treatments available, and so that changes the calculus, if you will, the situation. It's not as desperate as it was. But I think there is a misperception on the part of the American people, and the part of Congress for sure, fed and fueled by industry, which is that all these drugs that are not reaching the market are life-saving or life-changing. And that's just false. Most drugs that FDA reviews and approves are copies of drugs that are already on the market.
Me Too drugs.
Me Too drugs. Or they're the same drug that's already on the market, and it's being approved for another indication. I have an antibiotic that can treat your bronchitis, and now I want to use it to treat a urinary tract infection. Well, that's a separate indication, a separate approval. And so FDA goes ahead and, you know, drug companies argue you're keeping all these drugs off the market, but most of them don't represent a huge therapeutic advance. We'll give you an example. I mean, for certain diseases are life-threatening. You have a cancer where there's limited therapeutic options. You can see having accelerated approvals to get drugs to the marketplace. But even in the setting of cancer, where let's say you have a cancer where the 5-year survival is 10%, and now I have a drug that increases your 5-year survival by 50%. That sounds like a very great step forward, and it is, but in an absolute sense, we've just gone from 10% to 15%. So it's not like it's saving everybody who has that particular type of cancer. Most of those people die. And so I think the public needs to understand that there's a downside to this accelerated approvals. And in the process of accelerating the approvals, FDA has basically turned a blind eye to safety.
And so you went to Congress and said just that.
I went to Congress. I didn't volunteer to go to Congress. I was drafted, and not subpoenaed, but I was drafted. I was asked, and certainly I viewed it as my responsibility as a public servant to testify before Congress. And I did that, and I told Congress what I firmly believe, which is that FDA views industry as its client, and that FDA, as it's structured in the way it uses science and views the world of drug development, that it couldn't prevent another Vioxx from happening.
In fact, you named 5 other drugs that you think are not safe that are on the market currently.
Right, and those 5 drugs that I named, I hesitated in naming them because I didn't want to affect the stock prices, but one of the senators asked me, well, what are those 5 drugs? And I named those 5 drugs because they represented examples where the way FDA views safety results in their overestimating the benefits and underestimating the risks. So I wasn't saying that these drugs necessarily need to come off the market, but that they need to be reevaluated because the way FDA has looked at them is is inappropriate, and it's overvalued the benefits and undervalued the risks, and as a result, patients are being harmed unnecessarily.
And those drug companies that manufacture those particular drugs did take a hit after you testified, but not like Merck, which manufactured Vioxx, which value declined something like $40 billion.
Right.
Which I'm not sure any other individual has ever done that to a company before.
Right. Well, believe me, I didn't do what I did. I didn't do the studies on Vioxx with the intent of doing harm or injury to Merck or to any other company. What I was interested in doing is finding out what is the truth about the risks of this drug. I mean, here's a drug that if it's true that it increases heart attack risks by 500%. Well, heart attack is the leading killer of Americans in the United States. So it's a very common occurrence. And if I have something that increases that common occurrence fivefold, and I know that the drug is used by tens of millions of people, well, that's a disaster, and that has to be stopped.
Now, some people will say, well, that's fine. I want to know what the risk is. But a crew member was telling me before, they take a different COX-2 inhibitor, and they say that I've been on this particular drug for 7 years. I've never felt better. My choice was between a wheelchair or the prospect of death. I choose to live this way. Isn't that a choice that individuals should have?
There's choice and there's choice. We live in an environment where no individual consumer has all the information. And an individual consumer might say, yes, I'm willing to accept those risks, but at a population level it becomes completely unreasonable to allow that to happen. It's kind of the example of, am I willing to spend $1,000 for a diamond ring? And the answer is yes. The $1,000 is the cost of the side effect of the drug, but I'm getting a diamond, so I'm getting value back. At a population level, with many of these drugs, it's more like paying $1,000 for a glass ring that looks like a diamond. And so it becomes very difficult when you talk at the individual level that a person's saying, if I know the risks, I can make the decision. But then you get to the population level where most patients don't know all the information. Most doctors don't know all the information. What the physicians know is what the drug representatives have told them. And many times drug companies will they'll put the positive spin on very bad news for their drug. And so we don't live in a world where information is pure and it's accurate and where people can actually assimilate it and understand, well, what does that mean? I mean, it may be one thing for somebody who faces that, who's very severely affected, but is that a reasonable choice for somebody who's the weekend warrior, goes out, does a little too much gardening or plays a little too much sandlot baseball or a pickup game of basketball, and they have some sore muscles? Is that a rational choice? And I would argue that it isn't. And so since physicians don't decide, well, this person's very severely affected, and so it's worth taking the risk, and we're going to give him or her that drug. And this other patient who, nope, the world doesn't work that way. So you end up having to sort of operate at a blunt level. I think
we're almost out of time.
Okay.
And I really want to ask you this because it's really important, looking forward, how we're going to ensure the safety of drugs. It's been suggested, and I think you support this, that there be the Office of Drug Safety be removed from its current location and exist independently so it can review drugs that are on the market and make a determination on its own whether they should be on the market at all.
Right. The way things are right now, the group that makes the decisions about whether a drug can remain on the market or not is the group that approved it in the first place. So they have a vested interest in saying it can stay on the market because they don't want to prove themselves wrong. The Office of Drug Safety needs to be removed from that center, created separately now as its own center for safety, and then given the power to make the decisions about whether a drug can stay or go from the market, and also the power to force companies to do the appropriate things to manage the risks of the drug, to inform patients in language that's clear, to label correctly, to restrict the distribution of a drug if that's what's necessary. Because as it is now, companies, they call the tune, and they're footing the bill. So that has to change. That whole dynamic has to change.
Many thanks to Dr. David Graham for joining us in the coffee house. Loyalty to family, friends, and coworkers is a wonderful thing. Loyalty breeds trust, the glue that makes cooperation and community possible. But a blind loyalty that disregards the truth destroys trust. If FDA is to regain its reputation as the gold standard in drug regulation, it will owe a debt of gratitude to the likes of Dr. David Graham, who dared to blow the whistle. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum. Good job. Hey.
How many words, much less composers' names, begin with Z? Zim Zimmerell, my unabashedly square cousin Harry proclaimed between vigorous swigs of club soda. Joey and I ignored him like a song by Elvis Presley, passed the gleaming black disc back and forth like a riff, fumbled the name like poor sight readers massacring confirmation. Zawino? Zaano? What were his parents thinking, Joey wondered, placing the slow blue groove beneath the genuine, or so the salesman said, diamond needle. Cannonball Adderley climbing the pop charts, unbelievable as Bull Connor's ignorance. James Brown's footwork. Don't tell anybody he's a jazz musician, my father warned over dinner. That would ruin everything.
Welcome to WorkLife at the Coffee House. Many of you know that unions devoted a great deal of energy and resources in trying to elect John Kerry president. But what exactly did unions do, and how effective were they in delivering votes to Senator Kerry? I'm pleased that we have with us today David Boundy, who spent most of his waking hours for months working on this campaign. David is the Deputy Political Director of the AFL-CIO. David, it's nice to have you with us today, and welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Fred.
So why exactly was the labor movement so heavily invested in this campaign? What was the motivation?
The reason that the union movement was so invested in this campaign, the reason that so many people devoted so many hours and worked so hard to get rid of President Bush is the simple fact that on working family issues, he's been perhaps the worst president that we've had in my lifetime, probably going all the way back to the Depression. I mean, on issue after issue, he has not been on the side of workers. For example, since he's been president, he's overseen, since the first time since Herbert Hoover, we've seen an actual loss of jobs in this country, which is a remarkable thing. When you think about it, the country is a growing country, more immigrants, more people coming here all the time, and yet at the end of his 4 years, for the first time since Herbert Hoover, there are fewer jobs in this country than there were when he began. There are 44 million Americans without health care, 4 or 5 million more than when he began his term. And then lastly, just to sum up, we could also talk about overtime pay. This is a president who really fought hard to eliminate overtime pay for working Americans in this country over the period of the last couple of years.
Okay, so there was clearly a lot of motivation there. When did the labor movement get involved in the campaign? When did you start becoming engaged in this campaign?
Well, the labor movement has been engaged all along, because one of the things the labor movement does is it fights on issues on behalf of its members. And because President Bush's policies, eliminating collective bargaining rights, for about 250,000 workers, again, trying to eliminate the 40-hour work week and replace it with, a comp time bill that would give people 80 hours over 2 weeks, all sorts of complicated things, but all really geared to taking some rights that basic workers have and away from them. We've been fighting for the whole time from his very first day in office to stop what he'd been trying to do, his agenda. But in real terms, in the past 2 years, we were putting together a plan of how we would mobilize regular workers into voting against Bush and to elect a different president.
Well, so what was that plan? What was your strategy in this campaign? What was the basic game plan that you adopted going into it?
The basic game plan that we put together was very simple. What we try to do is we try to give regular workers, through their union, some real information, credible, documented, cited information of where the president stands on key issues. And then once we had a candidate, John Kerry in this case, we would, simply say, this is where John Kerry has stood on this issue, this is where George Bush is. And then we would get that information to workers in the work site is the best way. And as crazy as it may sound, in an era when millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on TV advertising, our most effective way is simply a leaflet with credible information presented to a worker in the workplace.
Face-to-face. So
Face-to-face conversations. And then beyond the workplace, of course, we do mail and you do phones. And we also have an aggressive door-to-door campaign where we go knocking on union members' doors and, again, trying to educate them about where the candidates stand on key issues.
So your campaign then was focused on your members? That was
legally, our campaign is entirely focused on our own internal membership, union members and their families.
Well, was this approach, the strategies that you adopted, was this new in this campaign, or is this something that's been developing over the years? Or
it's not new in this campaign. It's been developing over the past several years, really since 1996. It's a very aggressive approach, but we've never really put together something like we did this past cycle. We added some new elements. We added more accountability into how we got each of these aspects of it done, trying to make sure that we hit the right number of doors, that we made the right number of phone calls, and that we followed up and made sure that people were talked to one-on-one in the workplace.
Well, obviously your efforts weren't sufficient to elect your candidate, but that, of course, doesn't mean that labor wasn't potentially a significant force in this election. How significant was the support of labor for Senator Kerry?
If you look at the exit polls, on election day, and exit polls are polls taken as people exit, the voting booths, you would see that union members and their families, although only really, maybe 10, 11, 12% of the voting age population in the country actually comprised 1/4 of all votes cast. So we were able to put together a program where we vastly outperformed what our numbers in real terms are. We were 1/4 of every vote cast in this cycle.
And did union voters support Senator Kerry, or I assume they did, but to what extent? Do you have numbers
union
on
voters voted, on election night, what we did is we went in and took a poll of our own members. Several thousand members were interviewed on election night. And what we learned is that, union members by 2-to-1, 65, I think, to 33 or so, voted for John Kerry.
And do you have numbers on how that broke down in the target states?
I mean, in battleground states, in those battleground states where the campaign was really fought, where there was enormous amounts of money again spent on television, and where President Bush and Senator Kerry went to again and again, places like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and Minnesota. In those states, the John Kerry among union families actually even outperformed the overall numbers, and he, I think, it got 68% of all union votes in those states.
So, do you have any sense of what, if there wasn't without the union vote in this election, what this election might have looked like?
If you actually take the union votes out of the election, what you would see is that among non-union voters, I think that Bush would have won the election 55-44 or something. So there's an enormous difference between a union member and a non-union member. Just imagine it. You have two folks living in the same street. They may even have the same job. They're both electricians and they live right beside each other, except one is a union member and one is not. The union member gets some information about how this election will affect his family economically. The other family gets their information from TV, from newspapers, and that's really it. And maybe there's whatever the campaign does to reach out to them. They don't get any additional source of information about how the union affects, how the election will affect their lives. The union has something at stake, provides that information to the member, and now you have two people who maybe attend the same church, they have children in the same little league, they go to the same school, they may even have the same kind of job, but they vote entirely different ways.
So what then are some of the lessons that you've drawn from the election? I assume you're analyzing the results fairly carefully, and what kind of conclusions about what went right, what went wrong, and possible future implications for how labor might be involved in politics?
Well, that's the big question. Well, what we really want to do is we want to, if you look at this, you could say one thing very clearly, that there aren't enough union members in the country. You know, if there were more union members, John Kerry would be president, and I think that working families would be better off in the long term. What we need to do is organize. There needs to be a more effort placed on organizing more workers. We need to go back and retool our own program, but in the end, the union's role is to represent and fight for its members.
Well, what about looking beyond union members, how they voted in this? What happened in this election? What's your sense now of what this result was about?
You don't have to look at any theories. You can actually just look at the numbers. And going back to what some of those exit polls show us, one of the things that's really remarkable is that among the people who voted in 2000, people who voted in 2000 and then voted again in 2004. Now remember, in 2000, the election was a dead heat between Al Gore and George Bush, a 50-50 election. If you look at just the people who voted last time and didn't vote and voted again this time, George Bush, I think, won by 54 to 46 or so. Among new voters, however, John Kerry really won those significantly. So what
do you have any numbers on that?
Yeah, among new voters, I think John Kerry won by maybe more than 10 points, and that's how the election was as close as it was.
So there was an actual shift from Gore voters to a significant shift from people who voted for Gore in 2000 who voted for Bush in 2004.
Right.
And the size of that difference would have been much greater were it not for the votes of new voters. Is that what I'm hearing you saying?
That's correct. What we're going to have to do is we're just going to have to go back and fight in behalf of our members, try to make sure that we preserve their right to overtime pay, that we preserve Social Security as best we can. It's what we have to do is, members pay dues money so that we can, advocate in their behalf and try to win them, a bigger slice of the economic pie.
Mm-hmm. Any organizational innovation? I've heard of a couple of ideas that are on the drawing board in terms of new ways of developing organizations, political organizations within the labor movement.
There's a lot of talk about different ways that the union movement should be organized and different ways that we need to restructure ourselves to grow and to be more dynamic. All those things are being discussed, and hopefully by 2008 we'll be united again and be ready to fight hard so that we can elect a president who will deliver a better economic life for Americans.
Well, thank you, David, for helping us understand what was apparently a remarkable effort by the labor movement in the recent elections. Even more remarkable in that evidently it wasn't enough. I'm Fred Feinstein, and this has been WorkLife.
If poets would not go there, who would? Who else would give the children back to themselves, for the heart to report what the ear hears? So what they felt, they need not feel again. The children, by the time they were 5, had eaten from the tree of knowledge. They've seen the tiny betrayals. They have been given something people call love, but could not be named otherwise. How do we go into such a classroom? How do we make an ocean start? How will we find, when they fall down, what they were running from? We preserve the beloved. Reuben wants to preserve his father. He left us. He took care of me. He used to give me a bath. Luanda wants her baby sister, who is no longer here. Julio wants to keep forever his stepfather, who treats him equal, like his other son. Voices of the dream on the blackboard, the place behind it, opening, opening, in a tattered classroom in Paterson, New Jersey. All their bones broken, one by one, put back in place, luminous fragments of a poem. The silent child says, "The teacher's nice to everyone but me. That's how I know I'm special." Here is a pencil. You can write by its light. Love is hard to live with. It is a bird flying against the wind. The day you woke up with lashes across your back, you were born to write. Here, take this pencil. I was waiting for you before you were born. All you have is what I give you, a poem that refuses to die. All I have is what you give me, the courage to try.
Welcome to In Step at the Coffee House. Around the country, artists are working to bring their communities together, and the DC area is no different. Dance USA, the national service organization for dance, recently identified over 180 wide-ranging organizations dedicated to dance in the area. However, this exceptional diversity often results in little or no collaboration among organizations. In response to a series of town hall meetings with members of the local dance community, Dance USA recently created Dance Metro DC, which will be devoted to serving the needs of DC area dance groups and raising awareness of the high quality of work being done here. We're pleased to be joined by Johanna Seltzer, who was named Project Director for Dance Metro DC. Welcome to the Coffee House, Johanna.
Thank you.
Well, it sounds like we've got a lot going on in the area in dance, but why and what is a service organization?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, Dance Metro DC was created by a national service organization, Dance USA, and it's here to meet the needs of this community. Through the town hall meetings, they gathered information on what it is that this dance community and the public also need. And so that is, Dance Metro DC is here to answer those questions and those charges.
When you say dance community, what do you mean? Who are you talking about? Who is the dance community?
The dance community is dance makers, dancers, professional dancers, choreographers, administrators, lighting designers, costume designers, everybody that makes dance happen, I believe is who this organization will serve.
And is it all kinds of dance? Is it just the kind of dance that you go to the theater to see? Or
it is all genres of dance. Primarily concert dance is what has been focused on, I think, in other service organizations around the country. The uniqueness of this area, this region, is the diversity. And there is so much ethnic dance here, as well as your jazz, modern, ballet, tap. We have belly dance companies, flamenco companies, Mexican companies, Indian companies, wow. And it's wonderful to see that and see how they can join forces and really pull together to create audiences.
So what kind of things came up at these town hall meetings that all of these different dance groups want you to do?
The primary sort of charges for Dance Metro DC are to create a website for the dance community, but it's also really for the public because it will display a performance calendar. It will have information on master classes and granting applications and that sort of thing, and also have information on the local studios and what they offer and linking to them. So it's really a website for the dance community to access professionals, but also the general public to create a greater awareness of what this region offers.
That would be great, because I'm stopped in the grocery store by people who say to me, where can I take my daughter or my son to do this or that? And this would be one way they could find out. Were there other kinds of needs that came up besides this website?
I think, as you mentioned, collaboration, really. People tend to work in a vacuum here, and sort of pulling people together like they do in theater or music, really joining forces to work together on projects. Collaborative marketing is something that people really want to see happen. And also professional development seminars to really get people into a different place. Many companies don't have a staff. How can we even work to make that happen? And then how can we develop them into, you know, seasoned administrators so that they can really take these companies to the next level?
Yeah, I think this is something that people don't understand. I guess I think a lot of people think dance is like, well, don't you just like get up and dance around? And they don't realize that it's a real business.
Yes.
And that most of the dance in this area and the dance people see is being run as a business by the dancers. And that's where somebody like you comes in. Well, how did you end up being this person, and what were you doing before, and how did you get this job?
I like to say I was born into it. My mother was a dancer in this area. I'm a native Washingtonian, Bethesdian, and I really grew up around it, and went on to study dance at University of Maryland, and taught and performed for a few years, and then went into administration in various places. But for the last 10 years, I was managing director of Joy of Motion Dance Center, which really gave me a wide sort of look into all of the different genres. They offer so many different styles of dance, and really let me meet a lot of artists, got me exposed to creating curriculum for classes, but also theater work and producing shows and sort of, you know, a wide array of things.
Okay, so I want to ask you, is it fun being an arts administrator? Because we know, you and I know, that the field needs more and more people. Is it fun, and is it something that people can aspire to being?
Absolutely. I think so, or else I wouldn't be doing it. I think that especially if you want to stay connected to the field, and you really want to make dance happen. I mean, a lot of people ask me what I do, or especially what I did at Joy of Motion. I make dance happen for other people, and there have got to be people to do that, and it's extremely fulfilling, especially when you get that word of praise, or, you know, somebody says, well, that's wonderful, I really needed that information, and I sent in that grant application, and it's very fulfilling work, and I think that's what why a lot of people go that route.
Well, I know that Joy of Motion is one of our leading organizations, and 10 years there, you really helped build it, and it gives me a lot of hope that you're going to be able to bring some real strength and leadership to what is really very important for us right now. I think one of the things in the Washington area that's a strength and also a weakness is the fact that we're a metropolitan area, that we are divided by political boundaries, states. And I noticed that your organization is meant to be an umbrella to all that. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that's going to be like?
It's tricky. I won't lie. I mean, it's encompassing, it's called Metro DC for that reason, to encompass DC and the surrounding counties in Maryland and Virginia. And but that's how people think of this region. I mean, I know a lot of people growing up in Maryland, they would be sort of out of state and they say, oh, I'm from DC. I mean, most people sort of associate this region with the greater DC area. And it's very important to include all of those artists that are making work. It's so interchangeable. You can be an artist in Montgomery County and be performing. All your performances could be in DC, and you might not think anything of it, but really you're crossing state lines. And so I think, you know, whereas it is a vast amount of people, it's very important, and to sort of single it out, you're losing sight of the way that this region really operates.
Well, I'm very hopeful that you'll help us in that area, because I do think that's one way we need to be more collaborative. I know I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but I'll add my 2 cents worth. You know, I think one thing that people don't understand maybe is what happens to a young artist, whether they've gone to college or not. Whether, you know, someone who's dying to be a dancer, they danced since they were little, they took lessons, and they decide, okay, I'm going to become a dancer. And then what's the reality? What really happens to them, and how will your organization support that person?
I think for a young artist, without funding, there's not much that they can do. There's no support system for them. And my hope would be that Dance Metro DC could help to grow that artist so that they have a support system and they are able to secure a staff. I think the only way that a true company is going to exist is with a staff behind it, an executive director and an assistant possibly to start, and then you move on from there. And my hope with professional development seminars that eventually that young artist could grow into a company, and it would be self-sufficient and be writing the grant applications and so on and so forth to obtain the funding that allows them to create the art.
Right, because again, even though it is a business, these are nonprofit businesses, and no dance artist in the city can survive simply on their earned income.
Right.
They do have to learn how to get support from other places.
Right.
And that
right.
when you say professional development seminar, among the things you mean might be a fundraising seminar or something like that.
Right.
Or how to keep the books or something.
Sure. I mean, you can run the gamut on professional development seminars. Something I've had in mind that's come up lately for a lot of the sort of the young artists or the young companies is just how to put on a concert and the different aspects of that. There's the marketing aspect, and how do you write a press release, and how do you get the word out, and sort of what are your deadlines, that sort of thing. But also, how do critics look at your concert, and how do you appeal to the papers? That's that side of it. But also looking at, completely lost my train of thought.
Well, I think that all the things you're describing, again, are things that I think a public doesn't understand that artists need to develop, and it's great that you're going to be able to offer that. Now, there are other things that you've already done, like the Dance Awards. What's that?
The Metro DC Dance Awards, it's in its 5th year, and that was really created by Mason Ryan's Productions. I've been involved in it since the inception. And that is really, I think, one of sort of the stepping stones that has created a lot of community among the dancers here and brought them together on a different level to eventually sort of form this organization. The Metro DC Dance Awards honors dancers, choreographers, costume designers, lighting designers, so on and so forth, once a year at the Kennedy Center. September 26th is the next awards, and it's a real, way to honor people in the field and bring awareness to what is going on in the field.
Well, I think that this is just a fabulous place for us to take it to, because I think your organization is going to help really make those awards last, I hope, all year long, and let us really develop the kind of support structure that we so deeply need here. I'm looking forward to working with you, and I'm so glad that you are here at the Coffee House and that you're here. Many thanks to Dance Metro DC's Johanna Seltzer for joining me in the Coffee House. We're looking forward to watching the organization grow. I'm Liz Lerman, and this has been In Step.
When the last bomb fell on my Safaria, I piled all the dirty dishes of my poems, the bent forks and bit straws of my favorite prayers, prepared to fly them first-class explosive to the place where the earth kisses up to the cosmos. Seconds later, I rethought my act of aggression, prayed the keeper didn't notice, and returned to my street with his current of bullets, a brown shirt on his back, a rusted scissor in his coat, to cut off my tongue for a tablecloth. I don't remember the soundness of my sleep last night, how many times I prayed penance before my tower exploded, and hunks of my body became birthday balloons, each piece screaming amen in a new bloody language, impossible to reconcile.
take the wheel from here, 'cause I wanna disappear. There's not a cloud in the deep blue sky. Who could have known this was a good day to die? I'm a little bit south of Serenity. I can't see it from here. A little bit south of Serenity, but your voice draws me near. It leaves me a bit exposed. When our leaders act like they know what to do in this brand new fight. So this is the first day of the rest of your life. A little bit south of Serenity. I can't see it from here. A little bit south of Serenity, but your voice draws me near. When the emptiness starts to swell, it's like I spent a few days in hell. The silence is killing me. One day at a time in the land of the free. Oh yeah, a little bit south of Serenity. I can't see it from here. A little bit south of Serenity, but your voice draws me near. A little bit south of Serenity. I can't see it from here. No. A little bit south of Serenity, your voice draws me near. Hey.
Welcome, Billy Coulter, to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Dave.
Tom, welcome.
Thanks, Dave.
So we're a little bit south of here. So I'm holding in my hands the complete Billy Coulter collection.
That's it, all in one package.
Now, when we were talking backstage, you told me an amazing story of how we happen to be standing here tonight.
Right. Yeah.
I repeat some of it, at least till our producer starts waving us to hurry up.
And a couple of years ago, I was on vacation in Mexico, and the house band at this resort turned out to be the original drummer for Paul McCartney after he left the Beatles, bass player from Tower of Power, and keyboard player named Steve Toma, who had toured with Fleetwood Mac and was Glenn Frey's guy for many years. And we became friends. I jammed with them while I was at the resort. And Steve and I stayed in touch, and he produced about half the tracks on the CD.
Wow.
Originally as a demo, and we just had a great time doing it. I learned so much from him. It was just an amazing experience. And he's an incredible keyboard player, too. So
and that certainly was the inspiration.
Yeah, it was very cool.
It's a very cool story. That's a good thing.
I'm a very fortunate guy.
So kids out there, if you want to start in the music biz, take a vacation in Mexico, and we can't plug the place, but you know.
I don't think it's there anymore.
Right. Well, that must have been a hefty bill at the end of the week to pay those guys.
Yeah.
But we digress.
Yes.
What was the name of that song?
That's called South of Serenity.
Okay. Written about?
About the post 9/11 world we live in now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of sums up how I felt while I was stuck in traffic. I wrote that.
Yeah. Influences.
I have to say that it's the usual Bob Dylan, Beatles, Stones.
I almost heard in that song a little Dylan-type phrasing, except I could understand the lyrics when you're singing.
Yeah. And also, Ian Hunter from Mott the Hoople and John Lennon were two of my favorite songwriters, so I'm sure I'm just stepping all over their territory.
Yeah, well, it's paying homage.
Yes, that's
yeah,
right.
that's it. Better spin.
Sure.
Take us out with one more tune. What's it called?
This one's called One More Try.
Hmm.
It's a pretty song.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I took it all for granted, like you'd be there when I'm through. Don't try to understand it. For me, it's nothing new. I'll run at the first sign of love, but I can't seem to get me enough from you. The things I wish I told you were still trapped inside my mind. I could find a way to show you if you give me one more try. I never wrote a love song. I guess this'll have to do. I'll try to find inside me the words I hide from you. I've never known anything close to this, so I'm sure it's true. There may be more, the things I wish I told you were still trapped inside my mind. I could find a way to show you if you give me one more try. Don't dream about tomorrow. Don't think of yesterday. If I give you 10 dozen roses, would you listen to the words I'm saying? I know that I broke your heart, but I just wanna make a new start. Come on, babe. Come on, baby. The things I wish I told you were still trapped inside my mind. I could find a way to show you if you give me one more try. Yeah, the things I wish I told you, they're still trapped inside my mind. I could find a way to show you. Just give me one more. Give me one more try. Yeah, the things I wish I told you, I'm sure I must have told you. sworn I told you.
Your mother's on the phone, she blasted over the intercom, and I had a quick rush of reprieve because now, after 2.5 years, I would be able to speak to her after the dearth of those little mother-daughter conversations that sometimes ended in discord or even boredom, but that I had been missing, and oh, the thrill of the possibility, and I laughed out loud, saying it had been too long, and remembered, in fact, how long, and then I said, but my mother's dead. And the quiet fell around me, and the young girl's face next to me looked frightened. And I thought perhaps I was losing my grip until I saw the mistake. She had misheard the caller. But for the moment I had my mother back, and it was sweet to remember there was a time when she was on the phone, and yes, I should have called her on Wednesdays when she was by herself. And wouldn't it be nice to hear her voice? It's been so long. I've never gone this long without talking to her.